It's been revealed that the US and Israel have already begun discussing plans for the day after the Israel-Gaza conflict, including governance and security in Gaza. The news comes as Israel continues its offensive within the Gaza Strip. The Palestinian Health Ministry, which is run by Hamas, claims 241 people were killed in the last 24 hours. Let's go live to TalkTV's correspondent Tom Mutch, who's live in Israel for us now. Morning to you, or afternoon to you, Tom. Just give us a little latest, if you would, on that Hamas claim.
So I see that Chiron says end of the war ? I don't think many people here feel like the end of the war is in sight at the moment. At the moment, there are some preliminary discussions with the US and Israel over what will happen after the war, after Hamas is kicked out as everyone expects it to be. But then what will happen afterwards and who will take over a governing role in Gaza? Well, that's still very much up in the air. The US and the Europeans want a role for the Palestinian Authority. The Israelis are saying that they still want to have overall civil and military control. Other people have suggested roles for Egypt or the UAE or the Saudis. But the whole point is that no one really seems to know. And in the meantime, the fighting continues to rage. It's been obviously a pretty subdued holiday season here. Christmas isn't particularly widely celebrated in Israel, and in Bethlehem, where I was on Christmas Day, the crowds were mostly gone. Strangely enough, the pilgrims there were overwhelmingly Indonesian Christians who can easily access the West Bank via Jordan because they can fly there very easily. But most of the Christian pilgrims that you would have had from Europe were nowhere to be seen. They were kind of scared off by the fears of war or violence in the region.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of where next, the day after, as it's being called, I mean, that's, as you alluded to there, Tom, it's an incredibly complex situation, and you are forced to ask some very uncomfortable questions. Hamas will not stop. Hamas's idea is to eradicate Israel. They don't like Jews. They want to see a world without the Jewish faith around them. They see that land as their own. Even if this particular layer of Hamas superintendents were wiped out, there is another lot there. This is an ideology. It's not going to go away. What does the day after, what can the day after really look like?
Well, this is the problem. Like, as you've said, Hamas have said that if they had the opportunity, they'd do as many October the 7th as they possibly could. They regard it as a resounding success, even if they're being very badly battered now by the Israeli military response. And they're also, I think, in one way in which they have succeeded is to get a lot of international opprobrium to turn on Israel for what we've seen in Gaza, the scale of the bombardments and the scale of the casualties. Of course, it's difficult to know exactly of the figures, how reliable they are, and it's also difficult to know the breakdown between civilian and combatant deaths, but it's clearly the number of both civilian and combatant deaths is very, very high. And there's also the worry, of course, of what happens in the West Bank. I've been traveling a lot in the West Bank recently. People in the West Bank are very sick and fed up with the Palestinian Authority, who they believe are basically inefficient and corrupt and are never getting anything done. And support for Hamas in the West Bank is actually rising. So there's a very big question of not only what the day after is going to look like in Gaza, but has this set the prospects for a Palestinian state in the West Bank even further back, now that many people there are getting radicalized by the scenes that they see coming out of Gaza. The whole situation is extraordinarily complicated, and I'm yet to meet someone who has a decent idea of what things will look like in a year.
Yeah, you kind of wonder whether anybody is fully across that or could ever be expected to be right across that. You've kind of preempted an answer there. I was wondering about the Palestinian people, how much support there is for Hamas, whether there is a level or a contingent of people out there that would like to see these people gone and their country return to, or what they see as their country and their land return to some semblance of normality. But you say support seems to be growing.
So it depends a little bit about where you are. Now, in Gaza, it's very difficult to get reliable polling out of Gaza, but support for Hamas in Gaza seems to have been more or less static. There were some people who were very, very glad about what they saw as a military victory on October the 7th and didn't care about the horrendous civilian casualties that came with it. Yet there are many in Gaza who blame Hamas for the devastation that has accompanied them in the aftermath. There are many people who say things like, well, Hamas knew this Israeli response was coming and they never bothered to build us bomb shelters. They only built tunnels for their own fighters. They never bothered to stockpile. They stockpiled plenty of weapons, but they never stockpiled aid and food and medical supplies. Then you have people on the West Bank who haven't really been hit that hard by the war, but they see at the very least that Hamas is able to get something out of Israel. It's able to get political concessions, such as the release of Palestinian prisoners. And then you have the Palestinian citizens of Israel. And a lot of people were expecting that there could be a big sort of flare-up with Palestinian citizens of Israel. But by and large, they have remained, in fact, some could say fairly loyal to the Israeli state, because I've spoken to several of them who said that even if they want sort of more, more autonomy or more, dignity for the Palestinian people in Gaza and the West Bank, that they're horrified by what they saw on October the 7th, and they realize how much worse their own situation could be within the country. So it really varies among all of the different communities. But yes, at least on the West Bank, it does seem support is growing, while else, but then again, who knows how long that will be for.
And just briefly, how important is international support for Israel? Tom, we were talking earlier about Ukraine. There is a sense that whilst there is a flurry of support and condemnation for everything that happened on October 7th, etc., there is perhaps a sense that some of that interest, a fatigue has maybe set in terms of the eyes that are on the region right now.
Well, the thing is, Israel has an advantage that Ukraine does not, in that it is the preeminent military power in the world, and that it has been preparing for these kind of wars, well, really since the formation of the State of Israel in 1948. So it has huge stockpiles of weapons. Sure. It has almost every young person in the country has been trained or gone through military service. The owner of my hotel where I'm staying here in Galilee was just talking to me earlier about going through 6 weeks of hard urban combat in South Lebanon in 2006. So this is a society that's built around war, that is prepared for war, and that is, has the capability to fight war with or without foreign support. Whereas Ukraine, which is, surrounded by a much bigger military power, that is Russia, which has more manpower, more resources, it's a lot more reliant on Western support. Yes, people here are aware that, the international attention is fading a bit. However, people are quite self-sufficient at the same time, and I think they're willing to fight a long war with or without the support of the international community.